Welcome to the Surgibots Podcast, powered by Cruxx.
I'm a great believer in evidence-based medicine, firstly, because then you're doing the bestest for patients. I have no problem with people making money out of products or money out of implants or money out of pharmaceuticals, but just do it ethically. My gut feel is that robotics is really going to improve minimal access surgery even more. We need to continue to gather that evidence so that we can actually be factual about it and not guess at it. Two of the most misused terms in the world at the moment are digital and AI. I always recommend that people read one of the AI gurus of the world, Joshua Bengio. He is undoubtedly one of the fathers of AI, but he also is a voice of reason. Patients at the center of it. We're here for patients. And let's never ever forget that, because the minute we do that, we've lost our humanity.
Before we deep dive into this episode, I wanted to take 30 seconds to introduce you to the sponsors of this season of the podcast, TTP. TTP is a technical consultancy that has a 35-year track record helping companies transform innovative ideas into market-ready products. Their 300-strong team of scientists, engineers and designers all under one move can take care of your surgical robotics or imaging technology from a napkin sketch all the way through to early stage commercialization. I was lucky enough to get the invite out to their Cambridge facility. They gave me eyes on a number of the projects they're working on, and not only is the facility state of the art, but the main competitive advantage I see with these guys is their people. A group of incredibly smart, focused and friendly guys who do not shy away from a lofty engineering challenge. If you want to learn more about some of the work they've done or to talk more about a project you have in mind, shoot me a message on LinkedIn or visit their website, ttp.com, to get in touch with one of the team. Hello, Mark, and welcome to the Surgibots Podcast.
Henry, nice to be here. Really looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
That's no problem at all. So we're going to start off, and I want to find out how you got into the world of medicine and where did your career in this field start?
Right, I mean, that's always you've got to go back a hell of a long way. I almost don't have a memory that far back, Henry, but there you go. I was a very keen athlete as a young man, and got quite a lot of injuries, and that put me in front of doctors and found it interesting and decided I wanted to study medicine. So straight from school, age 17, I started at medical school and have thoroughly enjoyed it ever since.
Okay, so this was back in South Africa?
Correct, yes. I did both my undergraduate and my postgraduate training. Undergraduate in Johannesburg, and then I moved to Cape Town, where I did my postgraduate degrees.
Excellent.
And I specialised as an obstetrician gynecologist. Okay,
cool. What was it about that gynecology field that interested you, or like why did you go down that route?
I mean, that's a very interesting one. So I thought I was going to be a physician. And I liked internal medicine. I liked the academic challenge that it gave, but I had to do national service like many, like all South Africans, and I was seconded when I wasn't in the military side. I was seconded to the military hospital, and I was put in the gynae department, who was short of people. So I went there completely by chance, where I worked for a chap called Dick Legrellier, who was quite a visionary. And he kept saying to me, why don't you try thinking about doing a bit of gynae? And he said, you're scared you won't pass the exams. And actually what he showed me, as a gynecologist, I could be a surgeon. I could be a physician with an interest in endocrinology. I could show an interest in cancer, or I could do obstetrics and so on. So going into obs and gynae left you with a huge range of potential subjects that you could work in. And it has been an absolutely fascinating career. I started, obviously, both obstetrics and gynecology, and thoroughly enjoyed obstetrics, but it's quite a punitive career because it impacts on your after-hours life. And then developed this really big interest in gynecology. I started in endocrine, that sort of area, and then moved into what I finally ended up with, which is urogynecology, which is a gynecologist dealing with problems like incontinence and prolapse and so on.
Awesome. And then you, so this was all in South Africa. You moved to the UK. When was that?
Yes, I came to the UK. So my professor in South Africa, we trained entirely in teaching hospitals. And he was a great believer that we should also do some time in a district general hospital. And he encouraged all of us to come to England for a year or two. He felt there was a lot other things to learn here. It was around consenting process and patient communication. There were the subtleties. We were used to fairly almost third world medicine, high volume, really sick patients. And there was another whole side to it. And I must say I learned a huge amount coming to the UK in the beginning. I then got interested. A job came up under a man called John Southurst, who was one of the leading urogynecologists in the world, which I applied for and got. And so did my subspecialization as a urogynecologist, and then decided to stay in the UK because it was a stronger specialty here than there. And yes, I've been here ever since, which is more years than I care to remember.
Very good. And what did you learn working under one of the top urogyn specialists? What did you learn through that journey, and how did that impact?
He was an incredible guy, or is an incredible guy, John. I've kept contact with John, and when I retired from active daily clinical practice in the NHS, John came down to my farewell dinner. He was a real visionary, John. He wrote very well. He's a damn good scientist. He's an outstanding surgeon. And then to really irritate one completely, he's an award-winning artist. And in fact, in my study at home, I have a painting that he painted for me, which has pride of place. But he was a thoughtful man. And he taught me about, who needs the surgery, what the important aspects of introducing new surgical techniques. He also encouraged me to push the boundaries and, to explore new things. So he was a huge influence on my career and remains a huge influence. And probably of all the people I've worked for, he was probably the most influential in determining what I ended up as. The chap I did my national service with was also influential, Dick Legrelia. But John Southurst from Liverpool. So I went up and did my work in Liverpool. And it was a fantastic time there, learnt a lot. And as I said, a wonderful man to work for.
Incredible. So we obviously know that you're the CMO of CMR Surgical, bit of a mouthful, but CMO of CMR Surgical. We're going to dive into CMR Surgical, but before we go into that, I wanted to push on a story that I actually first heard at SRS, which is the need for evidence-based innovation and vaginal mesh. Can you talk to me about how that came about and just share the story that you shared with me?
Yeah, Henry, that's, it's such an important thing. We live in a world of hype, and we live in a world of sound bites. And it's causing huge damage to society in a variety of domains. I mean, whether it's social media or influencers or whatever else. And I'm a great believer in evidence-based medicine, firstly, because then you're doing the best that's for patients. But I'm also a massive believer in value-based medicine. Not only must there be the evidence for it, but it must also give value to society. We cannot afford just to carry on spending money on whims and so on. And back in the 90s, I was working in urogynecology when vaginal mesh operations, so these were operations utilizing plastic implants for incontinence and then latterly prolapse, became popularized. And really, they went from never having heard of to being standard of care in a year or so. And I was aware that in the 60s there had been the use of these mesh products for incontinence and prolapse, which actually hadn't met with all the success, and there'd been complications of it. And in fact, this work is published. It's in the Journal of the British Commonwealth, which is an interesting title for a journal, but which is now the British Journal of O&G. But there's a paper out of Oxford detailing one of these mesh operations with complications. And one of my bosses in general surgery had spoken about having had complications of meshes. So I questioned whether mesh should be used, and it didn't exactly do me a huge amount of good. I got teased quite a lot, and people felt that I was being a bit silly, and it's quite obvious it was a good option, and therefore we should be using it. So in my unit we didn't use it at all in the beginning, and in fact A person who I respected very highly from one of the big pharmaceutical companies came to me one day and said, "What will it cause you? What will it take you to use one of these products?" And I said, "5 years data," and so on. And by the time the first significant published data was actually published and in the public domain, there were already about 400,000 of these operations having been performed and in people. So it's quite a sort of a scar on device innovation, where all these products had actually already been put in thousands of people ahead of any real data coming out. And in fact, the first data, which was done very responsibly by one of the major companies, was a prospective randomized controlled trial. But for the complications that one got with meshes, it was too early, it was too small a study, and it was too short a study. So at the same time, I was doing work on classification of meshes. So I took all the various different meshes and implanted them in models to study how they'd behave and so on. And we were able to categorize the meshes into 6 types, only one of which was really suitable for implantation in a human. And so a lot of the others then fell by the wayside. They were taken out. And unfortunately then, I got very involved because the court cases started in America, and I was invited by law firms there as an expert witness. So I wasn't really proclaiming anything. I was merely giving the fact what made meshes behave in a particular way in the body, which ones were safe and which ones weren't safe. And of course, that's gone on now to get the sort of publicity that we all know about, and thousands of people have been injured with meshes, and a lot of people have been given anxiety who aren't injured, but are anxious that they might have been injured. So it was a fairly negative chapter in surgical history, and a reminder that we really do need. And one of the things that it needed was a registry of all comers. And if we had had a registry where every person getting the mesh was entered into it, we would have found out there were problems with some of the meshes far earlier, before they went into too many people. So that was a reminder that in medicine we've got to remember that at the end of the day it's about the patient, and everything else is secondary. Profit, fame, and it's about doing the right thing for patients at the right price.
Absolutely. And you said earlier that you were getting a lot of pushback in those early days. Who was that from? The medical community or the companies trying to sell the products? Who were the people pushing back on you?
Yeah, both. And that's why you can't just blame the companies. So the companies certainly, they were irritated by me because I was giving talks against it, and I was fairly vocal about the thing. I was also getting pushback from my colleagues who are using it quite openly. And in fact, I don't entirely blame them, because they were sold a concept that this was safe and easy to do and so on. And of course, then not only were some of the meshes a problem, but they were also sold to the wrong people. And some people were putting them in without the right training. So it's a very complex area. And when I do talk on it as a subject, Henry, I try and dissect it out, and I look at where did industry go wrong, where did the academic community go wrong, where did the practitioners go wrong, where did the regulators go wrong. And I think all of us, including surgeons, including regulators, including patient groups, all played a little role in the ultimate calamity and scandal that it turned out to be. And I think there are many places where mesh is valuable and useful and is curative for people. And it's not just in gynecology. Meshes are used in hernia repairs, etc. And I think, again, it's very difficult to have a mature and objective discussion about the benefits and the disadvantages of mesh at the moment, because the camps are incredibly polarized. And that too is not good for patients. We need to always be looking at, what is good for the patient, what's best for the patient. There was a very strong call to have all meshes banned. And I can't entirely agree with that, because there are many patients who the only option for treatment of a major hernia is a mesh material. So I try not to point a finger at any particular group. I think we all made errors in many different places, and ultimately did get the data out, and we do know a lot about it now. And it serves as a stark reminder going forward that we must always be very cautious, and the hype mustn't cloud our vision as to what's really good for patients.
So my next question then is, have we learnt our lesson?
Yes and no. I mean, one of the downsides of something like mesh and the Vioxx scandal and the metal and metal hip, there have been so many, is that the regulatory process then gets accelerated and it gets magnified. And regulation won't stop poor practice or criminality. And a lot of the regulators, say in Europe, for example, they used to have a thing called the Medical Device Directive, which was considerably shorter and easier to get products through than the United States. But they've now converted that to the Medical Device Regulatory Framework, which is so difficult and so big and so complex that people are moving their regulatory process away from Europe and towards the United States, where the FDA is now more transparent and easier to do. So again, one's got to be very, very careful with how one responds to it. I think we have learned. I think people, but you've always got the, I always worry about what I call the curse of the quarterlies. If you have a company going along and they get their quarterly reports and they're not as good as they should be, it's a motivation to people at a variety of levels to maybe do something a bit silly in order to improve their results. And we've got to be so careful of that all the time. We've got to be thinking, is this safe for patients? Is it good for patients? And that way, I mean, I have no problem with people making money out of products or money out of implants or money out of pharmaceuticals, but just do it ethically.
Excellent. So let's bring that conversation on to surgical robotics then. Do you think there's a hype at the moment in surgical robotics? And also, if we follow that on with AI as well.
Right. So let me go back a little bit, Henry, and put in perspective where I believe the drive for robotics comes from. About 35, 40 years ago, we introduced minimal access surgery. And when it came in, there were naysayers and there were proponents. And I'm old enough to remember the debates when the laparoscopic proponents would come to meetings, and then the older generation would say, oh, you have so many little holes in the abdomen, it's worse than my one big hole, etc., etc. And they were criticized, and they were slower and they were more expensive, etc. But minimal access, or keyhole surgery, as a lot of people would like to call it, has really shown itself to be fantastic. It has lowered complications by about 50%. Across all categories. It reduces surgical site infections, and just to give an idea of that, open wounds getting infected cost the European community about 27 billion euros a year. And that's because 50% go back into hospital and 12 to 20% go back to theatre, whereas with minimal access surgery they can be treated as outpatients. Hernias are reduced, length of stay in hospitals is reduced, time to return to normal activity and work is reduced, and there's just piles of papers supporting minimal access surgery. And then a paper was produced in 2016 from a unit in Johns Hopkins in America by a man called Marty Makary, who writes a lot on finances in medicine and surgery and so on. And he produced a paper showing that despite all these huge advantages of minimal access, only about 40% of people were getting it. And 60% of people were still getting open. And therefore, one starts to look at it and say, well, why is that? And the reason is that minimal access is jolly difficult to do. And not everybody can possibly do it. And therefore, they still stick to the old style. And therefore, the answer was, would robotics close that gap? So robot being, you've got enhanced vision, you've got 3D vision, you've got much more precise movements, you've got direct mapping, as we call it. So in normal keyhole, when you move your hand right, your instrument goes left. Whereas in robots, when you move your hand right, the instrument goes right. The instruments are articulated, the tips move, so you can manipulate instruments better. And the big argument was, would robots therefore be better? Now, robots have been around for 24 years. but have only penetrated about 4% of all surgery. And so there was a concept there, was robots have a lot of theoretical advantages, but why haven't they penetrated a bigger market? Question mark. And I just wondered whether maybe there were things that the robotic community, or the surgical community, weren't happy about. So we actually Delphi polled a significant number of surgeons who said what they really wanted was a smaller robot, more modular, could replicate exactly what they did laparoscopically, etc., be more affordable, and that just didn't exist. So myself and 4 colleagues in Cambridge set out to try and build a robot that we believed would be more suitable going forward. Of course, since then, there's been an explosion. There are more robots floating around than you can shake a stick at. The majority of them are predicated on the world leader, the existing one, in the way they work. And basically, those mostly hold their instruments like a dagger. And therefore, they do struggle a bit with reach. And in order to overcome the reach problems, they've got to be very big, tall, and so on. Whereas ours holds its instruments much more like a human end on, and therefore it's much smaller. So we've built a very small, modular, portable robot to perform minimal access in the same ways as one would normally do it.
Absolutely. So we're going to go back to the start of CMR Surgical then, because I want to hear about the early days, how you even think about pulling together a surgical robotics company when there's only one really player in the market. So talk to me about that early days. When did you decide, how did you decide that this was a company that you wanted to create and build?
Well, there's a funny side to that as well, Henry, because I was mumbling about robotics and trying to work out a way, because I'd run this laparoscopic training course for about 25 years and realized I could not train everybody to do it the way that really they should do it. So it was this concept, what could a robot, and I looked at what was available and didn't particularly like it. And my wife was attending antenatal class pretty much on her own. In fact, the woman running it said to her, "Do you have a partner?" She said, "No, I'm married." I said, "Oh, well, you must bring your husband along." And my wife said, "No, believe you me, he'd be much better off." And my co-founder, Luke, was attending antenatal classes with his wife. And he approached my wife, who's a surgeon, and said, "I believe you're a surgeon." And she said, "Yes." He said, "I'd like to ask you about robotics." And she said, "Wrong member of the family. The one at home is going on about it." And I have done other inventing, and I've done other products with big internationals. And so Luke came round to my house, and we started this conversation about what was needed. I have said to people that if I knew then what I know now, it would be questionable whether I would have started. It is... when you enter into something like this, it is so much bigger than you even begin to imagine. But fortunately, it's one of those Beatles moments in life. My 4 co-founders all brought different skills to the party, and the 5 of us together meshed into actually a very useful, functional unit. And nobody had all the tricks, and in the beginning, God, we could row as well. One of my co-founders and I, Paul and I, used to almost beat each other to death. We'd argue so much. And Martin, our CEO, used to spend his weekends calming the 2 of us down. So everybody had different contributions. And then Paul and I, he made some mistakes, I made some mistakes, he made some wins, I made some wins, and gradually got to working very closely together. We now latterly know that our personality profiles are almost identical. But so it goes. And so we sort of moved into this. And I think there was a shared commitment by all the founders and all the early people that joined us, and in fact the people that joined us now, that they're working on something quite special. We're working to build a piece of equipment and a system that will improve surgery and actually benefit mankind and society at large. And we are all very committed to that. So, a lot of my staff, I think, could probably earn more money in different institutions. They're highly qualified, very bright people, but are enjoying doing what they're doing because it's actually giving something back to society, and hopefully, doing something that will improve surgery, lessen complications, and get people back on their feet quicker. And so that's been a hugely exciting part about this whole journey, and it's what still drives me. I enjoy coming into work, and we also didn't stop there, Henry. And to my investors' credit, they gave us a lot of leeway to do the things that were important to us. So we've spent a lot of money on research. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, I used a process called IDEAL, which is an academic collaborative aimed at doing more affordable research in order to bring complex technology safely to market. And there's just been a big paper in Nature Medicine, one of the leading journals, saying how the IDEAL process is what's needed to bring robots. And we're the only company that has used that process. We've also run a very exceptional professional education program, because it's no use building a robot if you don't educate the people how to use it properly. And we use, again, novel technology. We've got virtual reality headsets so people can practice their exercises at home and then come in. Teams can practice. I could be here, you could be at your home, and somebody else could be in Southampton. We could practice together on a Oculus Quest type headset, and so things like that. We have an implementation team, so when the people start using it, we have a group that supervise and make sure it's safe. So we're very proud of what we've wrapped around the robot, as well as just building the robot. And we've now done 25,000 procedures in everything from transoral, chest, upper GI, colorectal, gynae, urology. So yes, getting to a point. Do we have much to do? Huge amount more to do. But yes, we believe we have a safe robot, and we believe we have an affordable robot going forward.
Amazing. And we're going to dive more into the specifics of the robot and the current situation, but I do want to learn more about, from the four people where you were pulling it all together, how did you go on that journey together, and what were the key steps that you took on that journey? I'd love to find out more about the early days and go through to now.
The beginning was quite curious. Everything from people having meetings in the local church, because it was a place that you could have privacy and it didn't have to cost you any money. And there was just no money, to put in. And eventually, we raised a small amount of money, which meant that 3 of the people could leave their day jobs and move into a tiny office. And it is a voyage of exploration. The stuff that concerned me didn't necessarily concern them at the beginning. The stuff they were concerned about, I was relatively complacent about. But as you work together, we all very receptive to external input, spoke to people, listened to people, watched what was going on, and then started working very closely together. And I think what's essential, Henry, is you have to be willing to disagree. You have to be willing to state your point. And that's something I learned. Doctors have a habit of trying to just be pleasant about it, go with the flow. And, you've got to sometimes stand up and say, no, that's wrong. It's not going to work. And that might require a fight, And so I think we gradually learnt each other's skills. We also learnt what each other's strengths were and what weaknesses were. And then, of course, the really important thing is, as you start to onboard people, that you onboard the right people. So you want the skills. Are they technically good? Are they academically strong? But number 3, do they share the vision? And do they want to do what you want to do? And what we wanted to do was improve surgery and improve outcomes. So everybody had to buy into that as a concept. And as I said, I'm sure a lot of people could have made a lot more money. We're not the highest payers on the block. It's a very, very expensive thing to build a robot, technically, educationally, etc. And, we've had to go through a number of funding rounds. We've raised a large amount of money. But it's that business of having an open mind, being receptive. So when people come into you and say, that are working for you, and say, well, I'm not happy about that, you've got to be open and say, right, what are you unhappy about? And then as a group explore what could be improved. It also requires some quite tough decisions at times where people have got to say, "Oh, you may make that point, but we're not going to agree with you, and we're not going to follow that line. We are going to do this." And then you have many other difficult things. We went from a computer-generated image to first in human in 5 years. That's a pretty big one. And you've got to say to yourself, at what point is it safe to start in humans? And obviously we had done work in cadavers, we had done work on animals, we knew how the instruments worked, we had got a CE mark. But then at which point, how do you go safely into human studies? So what we did as a company is we wrote and created a registry. So when we started in humans, every patient that was operated on, data went into the registry. The indication for the surgery, the intraoperative details, the post-operative details, and which we analyzed almost on a weekly basis, so that we knew at all times our outcomes were equivalent to or superior to published outcomes for minimal access surgery. And at any point that we'd hit an area where things had got worse, we would have stopped the program immediately. And so you follow that process, and that's hugely important, that patient safety remains at the core of what one is doing. And there again, we're absolutely blessed with the leadership team who 100% had patient safety at its core, and the company as well. I used to joke that I had two functions in the company, Henry. One was to raise the average age by 2 standard deviations, and the other was to drop the IQ by the same amount. We have a group of extremely talented, very bright, able young people working with us. We have now got some more mature candidates working with us as well, which is also important because you need that spectrum. But when we really first started, goodness, we looked like almost straight out of school, some of the people. But that was part of the whole story. So it's being open, it's being responsive, it's being willing at all points to change direction and to do what's best for the program, for the patients.
I'm interrupting today's episode to bring you a word about one of our sponsors, Fundamental VR. If you go back to season 1, you'll find a great episode with Richard Vincent, CEO of Fundamental, on all the reasons why training in the virtual world can shorten the learning curve and reduce training burden and costs. Improve competency at scale with interactive digital twins of your surgical robot or medical device in a high-fidelity virtual environment. Drive commercial success with Fundamental VR's virtual reality solutions.
Excellent. And so how have you built up that clinical evidence? Because it sounds like you do more than other companies do to build the clinical story, basically. So how have you continued to, raise the bar clinically and maintain that, clinically it is still getting the best outcomes?
Yeah, so we've got the registry, and we've now connected that to apps that the surgeons can get on their phone, so they can see how many cases they've done, what complications they've had, etc. If we get complications, serious ones, which everybody will get in surgery, we have the video, we have the telemetry of how the instruments move, and we've learned to analyze those. And then we give all that data to an independent committee who have nothing to do with the company. These are senior surgeons, some in Europe, some in America, and they review the video, they review the telemetry with us, and they look at the patient and make a conclusion. Is it a serious complication or not serious? Is it related? Is it what you'd expect for that operation? And is it related to the robot or not? And they are completely independent of us. I sit in on those meetings, but I have no comment. And so anything that came up, if they said we're really worried about that, we would then act on it. But we've not found that so far. The committee has always been happy that it's not been issued. So it's that commitment. We've obviously published everything we've done. So we even published the animal studies, and we published the laboratory studies, and now we're publishing the human studies. And we continue to run the registry. So, I have 2 papers on the registry, and I'm about to write a third one. And the third paper will have 10,000 patients in it. Now, in clinical studies where you normally have 200-300 patients, you realize 10,000 is a significant figure. I already have a paper with 3,000 patients in it. So that's this, and this is an ongoing commitment. Also we have a commitment to training. We're all the time looking at our training. And training is a really interesting one, Henry, because you've got to train people well, but it's also got to be affordable. because again, society can't afford it. So what we've done, the VR headsets mean people can sit at home and practice. So when they come in for their formal training, they already are well down the learning curve, and that shortens the time away from home and so on. We've also, a lot of people in surgery, people don't realize, train on cadavers, which are donated for medical science. And we've gone away from that. We now use mannequins, plastic mannequins, and we train on those. Now that one reduces cost hugely, and ethically there's no argument going on. And we think that is a really, really exciting area for the future. That's one of the things that presses my button, which is, ultimately getting, I sort of have this dream that one day a surgeon will be able to start online, do some practice, then go onto a simulator on a VR headset and practice, and then get a mannequin and practice on that. And so when they go in to operate on a patient for the first time, they're actually quite skilled. Whereas, we used to have this facetious comment. We used to say, see one, do one, teach one. And in my first year as a doctor, I phoned my boss one evening and I said, sir, there's a Operation X on the list this evening. I've never done one before. And he said, don't worry, it's no different from the books. And, those days are gone. And I almost see the next phase of training and evaluation of skills as exciting as anything we've done. The other exciting thing is the robots. We measure the movement of the instruments and the tips and the patient's and the surgeon's hands. And already with the 99.9% accuracy from the telemetry, we can tell the difference between a skilled surgeon and a novice. So that has implications for training one day where a machine could almost evaluate your skill. Scary.
Scary, but I guess possibly more accurate than someone's subjective opinion.
Yes, way more accurate. And, the educationists talk about a thing called sustained deliberate practice. And that's what the introduction of mannequins and exercises do. The surgeon can do something, you say, no, hold on a second, I didn't like that. You should have moved your needle from there to there, so do that again. And so, you're not quite right yet, do it again. Whereas you can't do that on a human. And, the thought that you should come to theatre and learn your surgery on a live person with the higher if you take surgeons, as their numbers increase, so their complications decrease. So what we want to do is shorten that so that the training gets them to a point when they're starting surgery much further down the learning curve, so that they know how to pick up the instruments, they know how to tie knots, they know how to suture, and they've learnt that in a laboratory at an affordable price, not on a human.
Absolutely. So we talked about the percentage figure earlier, and it depends who you ask about the adoption of robotics compared to minimal access. 3, 4, 5, some people say 7%, but it's nowhere near where we think it can be. So why do you think it's still not the adoption rate that I guess many have been expecting, and how do you think we're going to bring up that 3, 4, 5% to get into the teens?
Yes, I think those figures are interesting. I think if you took a global figure of all surgery in the world, of which there are about 256 million procedures per annum, of all surgeries, what percentage are done minimal access? Probably about 30%, 40%. And what percentage is done robotic is probably about 2.5 to 4%. In different geographies, you get different figures. So in the United States of America, that figure goes up much higher, probably to 10, 12%, and in some institutions will be as high as 70 or 80%. But the overall figure, given that figure I quoted at the beginning of us talking, 60% plus of surgery in the United States is still done open. Only 40% is done keyhole, of which a small percentage is done robotic. We know. Now, we did question surgeons why that was the case, and one is they quoted cost. They felt it was too expensive. 2, acquisition, getting access to was difficult, and I think that has always been the case. So one of the challenges there is to create systems which are truly democratize it. and one of ours is it's small. You can store it easily. You can move it from theatre to theatre. And ultimately, Henry, I think we will see the big shift happen as hospitals get 2, 3, 4, 5 robots. When I started keyhole surgery, we had one laparoscopic set of kit in the hospital. When I left, we had 150. And I think that may happen. So we need to continue to produce the evidence that it is. And also, I think there were a lot of minimal access surgeons who felt that the robot gave them no real advantage. And up till quite recently, a very skilled laparoscopic surgeon would probably get the same results as a robotic. Now, things have changed there slightly. There is a population of patients and there's certain areas where we are seeing the robot getting better outcomes. Okay, we've also seen shorter learning curves. We've also seen more people able to do it. So that democratizes. And then there's another area, which is ergonomics. And when you do keyhole surgery, you're standing for hours with your arm up. And I actually have a condition called a rotator cuff syndrome, which causes pain in your shoulder from all the years standing with my arm halfway dangled in the air. And some surgeons get neck problems with some robots from bending their neck forward. So the ergonomic argument, and people would be surprised to hear that the peak age for a surgeon is probably about 60. So to have surgeons retiring in their 50s is actually a waste of a valuable resource. And so if the ergonomics can be there, and also on a robot, sitting or standing, working in a robot, one is way less tired than operating laparoscopically with the ergonomics and the vision better and so on. So I think all of those together will start seeing it. And you get to a tipping point. But I think it's got to be, we'll only do it if they are affordable, they're easy to adopt, easy to pick up. And one of the advantages of my robotic system, the Versius, is that it was designed to do the surgery in the same way as the laparoscopic surgery is done. Same ports, same port position, same procedural steps. And I hope that will be one of the things that drives forward adoption of it.
Excellent. Is robotics always the solution? And if it's not, when are the wrong times to use a robot and when are the right times?
Nothing is always the solution, I don't think. And I think one of the maturities we need to move towards is work out. So I give you a fantastic example. Cervical cancer, cancer of the cervix, of the mouth of the womb, early cervical cancer. It was treated with a hysterectomy, a thing called a radical hysterectomy, which was done open. And then came laparoscopy in the 90s, and they all converted to doing it laparoscopically or keyhole. And then two colleagues of mine, a man called Pedro Ramirez and Andreas Obermeyer, one is in the United States, the other one's in Australia. They did a wonderful prospective randomized trial of laparoscopic surgery versus open surgery for early cervical cancer, cancer of the womb, mouth of the womb, and showed that open surgery got better outcomes and better survival. And I know both of them very well. I've seen the original data. And that paper, it's called the LAC paper, is now an established and accepted paper. So early stage mouth of the womb cancer is now done open rather than keyhole because the outcomes are superior. So I think whatever the trick is, we have to make sure that it is indeed better. And that's looking at the whole story. So we're looking at training, shorter, longer. We're looking at, does it take quicker or longer in theatre? Do we reduce the complications? Are the outcomes better? And that's why we need to continue to do randomized controlled trials, registries, to establish, because nothing is always the best. Will robot always be better than laparoscopy? Not necessarily. There may be some areas where either it will be more affordable to do it the other way or easier or quicker. So I think my gut feel is that robotics is really going to improve minimal access surgery even more. But we need to continue to gather that evidence so that we can actually be factual about it and not guess at it.
Exactly. And do you think that the industry as a whole should be doing more? more to educate when is the right time and when is the wrong time? And do you think as an industry rather than just as CMR Surgical, like where do you think it can be better?
I think the industry does need to do some cooperation as well. So I think we should all be looking at areas of commonality around training. Training is expensive. Training is expensive for countries. Training is expensive for universities. Training is expensive for health systems. And, we in industry can't shoulder the entire cost of training. And the countries struggle with costs of training. So I think we need the companies to work together, to work out commonality. What can we do together to make it streamlined and people can swap from system to system? We also need to be working with governments. We need to be working with universities so that we get training systems that are practical, that are efficient, and training systems that actually train people to the level we want them at. So I think we do have a responsibility as companies, and some of our profit when we make it should be geared towards giving back with training. But I also think governments need to grow up and realize that they too have a responsibility to improve surgical outcomes. In the low and middle income countries, it is recognized that poor surgical care impedes socioeconomic growth. Because these are people dependent on getting back to work, etc. So it is a as we get big data being used more and more, we're starting to see the negative aspects of poor surgery, poor surgical outcomes, and the devastation poor surgery can cause to an individual and to societies is huge. So yes, we do have responsibility, but I would like to see governments coming to the party as well and agreeing to fund some of the things that are needed.
Well, hopefully governments listen to this, but I don't think they are, so we'll see. But so let's think about the future then. So looking ahead, what do you think the future holds for surgical robotics as a whole?
So I think the first will be going back to what you and I have both been alluding to and saying. It's actually establishing where it's strong, its safety, etc. So that we are going to go into a period of consolidation. And also as it moves out of the hands of an elite group of surgeons into the general surgeons, which who maybe don't do the same volume of surgery. So that's a very important area. And then we've got all the things that will come with it. Two of the most misused terms in the world at the moment are digital and AI. But obviously they do. So for example, our robot is a digital robot in that it is software driven, which means that I can change the way it behaves every time I change the software. So every 6 months we enhance the software or upgrade it, and then without having to change the structure of the robot, so we can get better function. So that's the one thing. AI, I told you about how looking at telemetry, we can already get the machine to tell us the difference between an expert and a novice. Now, that gives us a glimpse of the future. When you're being appraised for your ability, you might go and work on a robot and it measures your hand movements and says, this guy's really efficient, or this woman, or this one's really inefficient and needs further training. Big data, and there'll be other things. For example, if I was about to press a button and activate one of the coagulation tools, which can burn, and it's in the wrong place, the machine could actually say, hold on a second, your instrument's in a dangerous place, don't activate it, or not let me activate it. So almost like car monitoring systems. So there's all those sort of things. The big data repositories telling us what to watch out for. I see that as almost the most exciting area going forward. Registries which we keep on our robot. There's a health group in America called Kaiser Permanente, and they largely represent most of the people in California. And there was a drug on the market called Vioxx, which was an anti-inflammatory, and it was a blockbuster, making a fortune for the company. It had been passed through FDA, everything was safe. And Kaiser Permanente noticed a rise in heart attacks in their patients and realized it was patients who were on Vioxx, and it was actually taken off the market. So, you get a glimpse of where these big data sets can help us. The AI one, I think there are so many areas that we're only just beginning to see where it may help with evaluation, with monitoring of outcomes, and with actually training. I mean, one of my colleagues is working on a system where you can take two videos and the machine can compare the two videos and say, Henry, in step number 5, you use 10 more steps than Mark uses, or 10 more minutes, or 20 more hand movements, and you could maybe improve that. So I just see many ways. What we mustn't do is just hype and say AI. And I forget the actual figure, but something like 90,000 apps approved last year. They cannot all be good or valuable or effective. We've got to make sure all these things are.
Absolutely. So do you think AI is getting really overhyped at the minute? And do you think there's any areas specifically where you're seeing it get a little bit overhyped?
I think when people talk about AI, I'm not convinced they always know what they're talking about. I mean, obviously, I think we all understand large language models, and I think we understand ChatGPT and things like that. But, the concept that AI, you may sit down at a robot, press a button and say, I want to do a gallbladder operation, and the robot goes, that's good, here's the gallbladder, and I'll do it. I think that's not in my lifetime. I always recommend that people read one of the AI gurus of the world, Joshua Bengio, and he is undoubtedly one of the fathers of AI, but he also is a voice of reason and wisdom who says, be careful. So I think, hype is a real worry in so many areas. You were at the robotic conference, and there were a lot of quite extravagant claims made about AI and hype. I mean, there's one the other day I posted on LinkedIn where they said, we've got a imaging system that can do overlay, and that can actually identify cancer in a pre-cancerous phase. Nobody's published on that. And then the biggest question you ask is, what would your false positives be? So how many people might be operated on who don't turn out to have cancer and suffer injury as a result of the surgery? So, we need to all the time be saying to ourselves, just because it's AI doesn't mean it's right or better. But on the other hand, I think we'll be able to structure curricula. Big data goes into it, and that's not necessarily AI. I mean, machine learning is not quite AI, but very useful. And I think as long as we are mature, as long as we are proportionate, and as long as we continue to gather the appropriate and genuine data, and we don't just go with hype, and we'll be okay. I mean, newspapers can hype medical events quite badly, and then they don't quite turn out to be what they are.
Understood. So look, Mark, this has been a fascinating conversation for me. I've really enjoyed it. Just give you an opportunity, if there's any takeaways or final comments, is there anything you'd like to share with the audience that you want them to take away from this episode?
Henry, I think I've enjoyed talking to you as well and sharing what is obviously a passion of mine. I think what I want to say is to all companies, to all health systems and so on, is let's remember that we're here for the patient. And, anti-competitive behavior is all good and well. It's not good for even economics. It's not good for in just straight business. In health, it's almost unethical. We've got to remember that whatever we do, we are looking to get the best systems in place for patients and do the best for patients that we can. And so I think my take-home message is the patient's at the center of it. We're here for patients, and let's never, ever forget that. Because the minute we do that, we've lost our humanity, and then we go down a slippery slope. And if it turns out that certain laparoscopy is better than the robot, then I must accept that. And if data, and we must have where we are better than, where patients are benefiting, at an affordable rate that the health system is benefiting, so we're doing more affordable care for a greater percentage of the population.
Amazing. Thank you very much for joining me today, Mark.
Henry, thank you.